Hello and welcome to another chess improvement video. My name is Bao and we're going to continue on with our tactical motif training that we started, I don't know, a couple episodes ago, 6 episodes ago, 7. I don't even know which number video this is. I should have probably checked on my YouTube channel before I started. How very unprofessional. I don't really care. But I have another idea I wanted to bring up for the tweak in my chess practicing. And so, if you have been watching the videos up to this point, which that's crazy, I don't know. I don't know how you found these videos, but if you have, then you know that what I've been dealing with is pins and forks. 1 to 2 move, I think, is the show. Let's see the sucker. I forgot how many moves. Just maybe one move ones? I don't know. Can I... Moves. Loading. But it was basically... I guess it's only one move ones. Yes. Yes, I think so. Yes. So only one move pins and forks in a combined set together. And I was thinking, well, if I want to kind of memorize the pins and fork patterns more strongly into my brain, I think I have a regime that might actually make this a little more, what would be the word? Effective. And this is what we're going to do. So, today we're going to go to the problem search once more. Go to the advanced search. Only add pins. And we will do number of moves, max 1, blah, 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 quality, okay, that's great. And cha-cha-cha, if we do a search for that, we get potentially half of our pins and forks, probably. I don't remember the exact numbers, but this seems about right. So we're going to create that problem set. We'll call that pins. And then we will do the same thing for forks. / double attacks. So we do a search for that, and that should have been around 300 and something. Boom, yes, that is exactly right. And we will call this forks. And we will create those. And so the idea is this, because I was thinking about ideas of training, how I train my mates, and usually what I do is I do mate in ones, then I do mate in ones and twos, then mate in ones and twos and threes. But I was thinking, oh, what would be interesting is if I did like mate in ones, mate in twos, then did mate in ones and twos, etc., etc. And this kind of follows a general principle, which is do like 10 problems of pins, get used to looking at pins, then do 10 problems of forks, get used to looking at forks, then do pins and forks at the same time, and that adds on the challenge while also diversifying what I'm looking for exactly. But unless you start by priming up and warming up with looking at one specific tactic, I don't think you get better as quickly, especially when it comes to rote memorization, which is kind of what we're trying to do. Which is kind of interesting, because as a kid, or when I was younger, not necessarily a kid, I would have thought rote memorization learning is potentially not the best way of learning, especially for abstract ideas. However, I think rote memorization learning, kind of like learning your multiplication table, is one of those basic tools you want to kind of use, even if you do understand the abstract idea that multiplication is just literally multiplying the same thing that many times, or adding the same thing that many times. Being able to have a pattern recognition already kind of set into your brain makes further advancing tactics and combinations easier to spot and quicker, which I think in chess is, as not much is attributed to speed. I think in the game, if you have to use less energy and time in your brain for calculating or trying to figure out the tactical motif going on, then you can spend more time on the calculations and the visualizations, which of course that's what we want to do. So let's go to the pins first, and then yeah, the idea today will be, let's do like 20 pins, 20 forks, and then 20 pins and forks. And that is a lot, but I think that will be good, and we're doing pins right now. So let's look at what's going on. Cha-cha. So, yeah, their bishop on f4 looks pretty dangerous. Looking at our queen, so here's an idea. Let's say we take with our bishop the rook on d1. If they do decide to take our queen at that point with the bishop, then we will be able to take the rook, and that would be checkmate. The alternative line is bishop takes rook on d1, then queen would take on d1, thus still keeping that back rank secure from a back rank checkmate. However, when that happens, the queen will not be defending the bishop on f4, at which point we would be able to take their bishop with our rook, and rook, queen takes, we would be up a rook at that point. So that looks like the right answer. What happens with this bishop after it takes on c6 I don't think is that big of a deal. There are plenty of places for this rook, who would be targeted on e8 to move around. So I think this is the right thing to consider. That being the case, you know, we do want to take a quick glance at what other potential lines there may be. And I'm on the fence about this point currently in my memorization training, or tactical motif memorization, pattern recognition training. God, that's such a long name. Is, do I want to also try to enforce the good habits of, one, you know, looking at all of the responses that an enemy can have, and two, looking for alternative lines that might be better. And, you know, the lazier part of me, who's also very focused on the short term of like, let's just get this pattern recognition down, would say, nah, that's less effective. Just focus on the pattern recognition. If you get a problem wrong, that's not an issue. Just try to look for those patterns and just skip on through 100 at a time. And I think that will be a fun little video we can do at some point in the future, where it's just pins, one move pins, and I do gut instinct ones and just keep on doing them. And I think potentially that might be the best way to do the pattern recognition for these tactical motifs. However, I think when I'm regularly doing tactics, I think it's beneficial that I still try to maintain good habits. One, because I think good habits are hard to kind of imprint, and two, because if I don't do them right now, it's just going to get harder later. I guess there's the same kind of reasons, since it's so hard to imprint, that it's better to start early on. And even if it does make the videos a little bit longer, I think it's worth it. I think it's a skill that's definitely worth it. So the question would be, in this case, what is the pin that we were looking at? I guess the pin is the bishop on f4. But yeah. So the original line I'm thinking is bishop takes rook on d1. If rook takes, then queen takes. Oh, actually, there are three alternatives. I'm sorry. So the original line we looked at was rook takes d1, bishop takes c7, rook takes f1. That's what we were looking at, which would be checkmate. So that's no good for white. There's rook takes d1, rook takes d, or bishop takes d1, rook takes d1, at which point, what do we have after that? We have rook takes f4 after that, which would be pretty sick. There might be a bishop takes c8 after that, trying to trade my rook on f4 by the queen with the bishop on c6, but I can just nimbly move that over, rook to f8, doubling my rooks, which is pretty bad, especially when your back rank's closed like that, and you just went down on a rook. So there's that. Alternative, the second line that we had looked at was bishop takes d1, queen takes d1, at which point we can still do rook takes bishop f4, and if rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and we're just up a lot of stuff. If after rook takes, they do bishop takes, then we just do rook takes, queen takes, and then queen takes bishop, and we'd still be up a lot of stuff. So going through that line, everything looks pretty solid, and that makes me think that's the best line, but it's good to think about some other alternative lines that are out there. Interesting line that I see potentially is bishop to e2, double attacking f1 and d1, even though we're not really doing a double attacking puzzle right now. That could also be interesting, putting both of the rooks in a tight spot. But why do that when you can just take one of the rooks outright currently right now? Is there a benefit to doing bishop to e2 compared to just bishop taking on d1? If the bishop goes to e2, if the bishop goes to e2, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop takes, and we're down a queen. Doesn't seem very good, and we didn't, actually win anything. So yeah, I feel like it's just giving them tempo, and it's not necessarily a great move. Another idea that comes to mind would be like knight to e6, putting more attackers on f4. In that case, bishop takes, rook takes, knight could take, rook would take. That doesn't look that jolly either. So I might not be giving the alternative lines a fair swing, but I honestly think the bishop taking seems like the best move. So let's see if it is. If it's not, I mean, it's a one-move puzzle, so we're not going to know. But, yeah, okay. That is the right move. And it would be interesting to know what the analysis further down with that would be. But I said 20, 20, and 20, so yeah. Let's just keep on chugging along. Okay, so there's a pin, bishop, rook, king. There's also the queen. This looks just like a straight checkmate because the rook can't take, king can't take. Yeah, that's it. I don't think I have to look at alternatives when the main line is just a straight checkmate. Let's just make sure that white doesn't have a response. So, rook on f2 is pinned by my bishop. Queen is looking directly at the king. I have my supporter. If I go to g2, queen takes g2, check. King can't move anywhere. Rook can't take. That is just a checkmate. Okay, nice mate in one. Okay, similar kind of puzzle-ish. There is a pawn that's pinned by my bishop currently. However, if I take on h5 by my queen, then the queen could take. But if my queen moves to h6, the pawn can't take because it's pinned. And that looks, again, like a very solid checkmate. Okay, we're at 3 now. Okay, this is interesting. The bishop decided to pin itself between the rook and the queen, with potentially some awesome shenanigans with the queen taking on f3 check, king having to either go to h4 or h2. h4 is terrible, rook comes in, and then it's a very slow checkmate going in there. Or, I'm sorry, it wouldn't be a checkmate because rook would come, queen would take to try to dispel the checkmate, and the queen would take the queen. So rook for queen, that's not bad at all. Ha-cha-cha. That being said, I forgot there is a pawn on g2. So even if queen takes right now, there is at least one move where the pawn could take. So that's not great for them. This situation with the rooks being on the same file is also interesting. The queen being able to take on e7 is also staggeringly interesting. This is a very volatile situation. The first thought that comes to mind would be something like rook takes e2 but queen just takes. But if queen takes, then bishop takes. So that doesn't seem that bad at all. So we could do rook takes bishop, but then there's rook takes rook, and that's pretty undefended, but then we would take the queen. So that's not very good for black. So rook takes bishop, and potentially rook takes bishop, check. That's pretty strong. Oh, but then I have the pawn takes rook, queen takes rook. So we'd be fairly even on everything, but I would be up tempo, so then I would be able to do rook takes rook. So that ends in my favor as well, which is interesting. Right? So rook takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, or pawn takes rook, queen takes rook, rook takes rook. Yes. Potentially there might be another in-between move, so rook takes bishop. Rook takes bishop, pawn takes bishop, rook takes bishop. But then rook would take queen, so no, that's not good. So is this just a crazy, crazy trading scenario? It seems like rook takes bishop in all of these scenarios looks pretty darn strong. That being said, does it make more sense to start with rook takes rook first? Because if rook takes rook, and then let's say queen or rook takes f2, pawn takes f2, queen takes f3, king goes to h4. Oh, if rook takes rook, then the rook can't move because of the pin. This becomes completely invalid, actually. So the rook takes c8 seems pretty dope, especially since rook takes c8 kind of has to be met with rook takes c8, in which case then we get a bishop after that. Whereas this original line, I'm uncertain that I've done all of the calculations necessary for the tricky things that could potentially happen, especially something like queen to g4, which could potentially be met by queen to, or queen to g5 check, queen to g4 would block it. I feel like the rook taking the rook seems like a clearer path in this situation. They lose one of the attackers, or f3. If any shenanigans happen with queen, we can trade off the queens. If the rook takes on f8, then we're going to take a free bishop after that. That seems good. I'm going to go with that. And it's great. That's awesome. I'm really curious, however, to see... Very, very curious to see what would have happened if... Oh, no, go back. Okay. I'm curious to see what would have happened if we did this. Oh, I didn't even consider queen takes rook there. Thank God I didn't do that line. So in that, I would have lost a rook for a bishop. Wow, I'm so glad I looked at the alternative line. How embarrassing not to see the queen takes rook in that situation. Whatever. Let's move on to the next pin. Okay, we're on 4 pins now. Wow, maybe 20 pins is a lot. But in this situation, we have another beautiful checkmate. Again, this diagonal piece, which happens to be the bishop in this case on g7, is royally pinned with my bishop on e6, which means if I take that pawn on h6 with my queen on d6, so queen takes h6, that is a checkmate because g8 is also guarded by one of my other bishops right now. Question is, if queen does take on h6, are there ways for black to block? No. The knight was the only potential blocker for h7, but now he's gone. So, yeah, that's a checkmate. Alright, 5 out of 5. Let's go on to the next one. What was just taken? Okay, my bishop was taken. That's interesting. So, I mean, what stops my pawn from taking that rook? I don't get it. That seems much better for me. I have more material. Not only that, the bishop would be pinned on f6. The knight has some places to go, but his next spot has to be a dark square, so my bishop is actually guarding an insane amount of squares. And with the rook on the f-file and my pawn on g3, the knight can't go anywhere on the king side, actually. The only places he can really go to are on the queen side. Is that bad? Is that good? I don't know. Oh, also the bishops are in the same place, and so after I take, that bishop, yeah, now can't hurt my little bishop. That seems good. I like that answer. I mean, that's just a better material exchange. Yep. Cool beans. Alright, let's move to the next one. I wonder if in this case right now, I would do bishop takes bishop, and then try to see if this rook could do something about this knight, but my my personal confidence towards a rook versus knight endgame it's not good. I know logically the rook should win, but man, knights are tricky, yo. Knights are way tricky. Okay, what's going on here? If I take the knight with my knight, then my rook is going to be in trouble. However, if I take with the queen, then the queen gets to take my knight and is looking hungrily at my rook at that point. That doesn't seem great. Dun, 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 dun. So the question would be in this situation, where's the pin? What is pinned by what? Well, their queen is pinning my pawn on e6 to my king, so that's not great. There is a pin from that rook and my bishop on g2 with that pawn as well. There's another pin between my rook and his rook on the h-file. But I don't know if any of those are going to become used in this situation. Defensively, another potential that I see right now is for my king to move to e7. But as I say that, I realize there are two attackers already on my e7. Or I mean on my knight on e6, so that wouldn't be, or f6, so that wouldn't be very good. So I have to deal with this tricky situation. But the question is, what is the answer? I honestly am not sure. Is there a way to keep my king safe while also saving my knight? Or my rook on h8? If I do save my knight by taking his knight on d7, queen takes h8, then my knight could go to f8 afterwards. But that's probably not the answer to this puzzle. I like that this kind of situation could happen in a real game as well. I know all of these puzzles on Chess Tempo are supposed to be from real games, but sometimes, I don't know, sometimes the puzzles seem a little bit convoluted. But this one definitely seems like something that could happen. So if we take his knight with my queen on d7, then he's going to take my knight on f7, and then if I move, my king can't move to a lot of good places actually, so let's say I move my queen to e7 so that when she does take my rook, then I can move my queen to f8, and white would be up, well, would have taken a minor piece and a major piece, which don't sound like a good trade at all. The pin. Well, I mean, if there is a pin that's dangerous, it is definitely the pin that his queen has on my knight right now. Oh boy, I did not think of that. So I think the answer is taking the knight with my king and then running into c8 afterwards. Or maybe I don't even have to run because the queen side is fairly well guarded in this situation. And the king taking d7 comes with a bonus of continuing my defense of my knight on f6 while also, what's the word, connecting my queen on d8 with my rook on h8. So that seems like the right answer. Are there potential things that could go wrong with that? Well, what about queen b5 afterwards? That would be met with me running back to maybe e6. Yeah, I would have to do a little bit of king walking, but in the end I get to save all of my pieces, so that sounds pretty good. Boom. Okay. 7 out of 7. 13 more to go. Holy Jesus. And then we have to go to forks, and then we have to go to pins and forks for 20 more. Oh boy. I think I've set up myself for quite the goal today. Especially since I'm not used to doing this many puzzles. Usually for these videos while I'm talking, I only do like, what, 7? 8? So I may have put myself to too strong of a challenge. That being the case, there's no embarrassment and failure. However, I do want to push myself as hard as I can. Let's try to get to 10 for the pins, and then we'll see where we're at. I think 10 pins for today sounds like a great little practice, and it seems like, what is it? It seems like even just working on pins, while originally I thought that would be too boring, turns out to be amazing practice for myself anyway. Okay, then now, moving back into the puzzles, I see the pin that we have, the queen and the king and the pawn on d4. And so that means this bishop is not actually defended, and so my rook can take if my queen tries to do, or if the opponent's queen tries to do something with like a check and then taking my rook. My pawn is there to defend it, or defend that position, even though the rook isn't tightly defended. I don't think the queen has a lot of maneuverable positions to be a danger to my rook, so I don't think that's an issue. Also, if the queen did move to d3, I guess the rook could just take it, so there's that. Alright, some of these puzzles are easier, while others are a little bit harder. Or maybe I'm just not very used to seeing some of these pins, right? Especially when the pin is on my side. Gotta really think about it, which is cool. I think that's great as well. Okay, so we see another bishop and king diagonal pin. So, you know, they say put the bishop on the longest diagonal, but like from these lessons, I'm starting to think very similar to how you want to put the rook against the enemy's queen or the king. Maybe trying to put the bishop in dangerous ass places really sticks it to the enemy as well. I'm thinking so, which is great. That's definitely a new thing to learn. In this scenario, that knight on g6 actually isn't defended because of the king, so, or the pawn, or the bishop and king pin by the pawn on f7. So let's take the knight, and that's number 9. Let's see what we have here. Is there a royal pin of some sort? From our position, it does not look like it. So, oh, actually, there is. There is a pin, and it is delicious. So, there is a knight on f4. That's mine. I have a rook on f1. The king is on f8, and there is a pawn there on f7. And the knight can potentially right now go to e6 and get taken by the bishop that I didn't see on g4. So that's not a great idea, but alternatively he can go to g6 and hit him with a check and not get eaten by that pawn because it's pinned, and the king can't move to g8 from the check by the knight because the queen is placed on h7 guarding that square on g8. So that looks like a checkmate. Okay, so that's 10. Cool. How do I feel? I feel okay. After I reduced from 20, 10 definitely became a lot more doable. I am surprised by how beneficial it has been just to focus on pins and not even add forks. So even though my original intent was some pins, some forks, and pins and forks, I'm thinking maybe just for today we do maybe 2 or 3 more pins, depending on how hard they are. Maybe 5 pins. I don't know. Let's just keep on going with the pins and just keep on focusing on pins. Pin, 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 pin. Alright. So there's a pin. Again, king on h1, my bishop on c6. There is a pawn. That means that's a free knight. So let's take it. Sounds good. Okay. So in this scenario, we have a bishop, and we have a rook, and on our side we have 2 rooks. What's going to happen here? The pawn is pinned by the 2 rooks looking at each other, which means that the bishop is not safely defended. If I do rook takes bishop and pawn takes bishop, then I earn another rook afterwards. So that is what the puzzle is. Yay. Okay. In this scenario, the pawn is pinned on e7. These are simple ones. Let's keep going with these. There is a pin by the queen to the queen. Yes, yes, yes. Yes. So, what are some options that we have here? We have rook takes knight, and queen can't defend that, and also we put another attacker on that queen. That is dangerous. Oh god, I got it wrong. Okay. So what was right? There's a mate in 1? Oh my gosh, because... So I got too greedy gobbling my pieces, which is one of my worst habits. If I see free things to be eaten, I just num 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 num. Instead of thinking about what we're actually trying to do in this game, which is get a goddamn checkmate. So that is a deserved loss. That's my bad. And I've been thinking, and the first thing, every time you start a puzzle, the first thing you should think is, can I get a checkmate? After that, if there isn't in that situation a checkmate, then you start looking for other alternatives. But checkmate should always be the first thing that you should think about. The first thing, like in this situation, I was automatically thinking, hey, why not bishop take queen? That looks awesome. But in reality, there's a much better idea, which is rook to h6 checkmate. So gotta learn. Gotta learn. There is a very specific goal we're trying to do in this game, and I just gotta learn. Alright, so we're white in this position. We're equal in material when it comes to the pieces, down by 1 pawn. There is a pin by the pawn on h6, rook and king. Is there a potential checkmate? Is there a potential checkmate? If we take the rook, if we take the pawn on h6 with our rook, then the pawn takes the rook on h6. So that doesn't look good. If we do like a check with our queen on g4 or f3, the queens can just trade. So that doesn't look great either. Oh, there is a checkmate. That's wonderful. So I was about to just start looking at alternative lines. Well, I guess I did start because that's how I found this line, which is because of the pin on the pawn on h6, if I move my queen to g5, that pawn can't actually defend. And the king is on the side of board. The queen's hugging him, so that's checkmate. Okay, so pawn, bishop, king, pin, f7, and so rook can take. So that would be a free bishop. Let's think about checkmates. In this situation, I think the king has so much room. I don't think there's a checkmate coming. No, I don't think so. So let's just take that bishop and move to the next puzzle. Okay, so that bishop on b7 just looks delicious. That looks good. Looks like a free bishop. And then we can move our rook up to b8. And then the king would have to move out of the way, and then we get a rook as well. I wish we could just do a8 right now and, you know, concrete that we take h8, the rook on h8, but because of the bishop we can't do that. There is some kind of knight move we could do, two different knight moves we can do to put the king in check, but I don't think that's a checkmate in this situation. Oh, and I'm in check. They don't make that very obvious. But yes, I am in check. And so I have to do something. There's only really one place I can move to with my king if I... Oh no, three places I can move to with my king, but they all lead to unfavorable, like, pinish situations. I don't want to go to e3 because of the pin from his bishop. I don't want to go to e4 because of the pin from his other bishop on b7. And I don't want to go to g4 because... Why? Why not? I don't know. G4... G4 seems iffy. There are a lot of pawns over there. Yeah, I don't think I would want to go to g4 actually. I don't see a lot wrong with it, but gut instinct says that's a kind of a dangerous place to be. Running out of... Ah, that's why. Because I'm running out of flight squares. Right. So, that wouldn't be so hot. So, I'm thinking maybe something like... Just take with the bishop, the knight, on d4. So, bishop takes knight on d4, pawn takes knight on d4. Oh, bums, I see. So there are other problems as well. Because if I do bishop takes knight on d4, then there is, after that, instead of taking my bishop right then, there's also bishop takes knight, my knight on d5, right after that. And then my king has to move, and it is, again, a bit uncomfortable, and then he can take my bishop. So this is a very hard and dangerous situation. Ah. Nope. Sorry. I said ah, but then I realized I'm in check. So I have to do something. I have to either move or get rid of that knight. And if that happens, then I lose my nighty night, and I don't want to lose my nighty night. I don't want it. This is a tricky puzzle. It's very, very tricky. And why is my knight in such a shit position? Who the fuck was defending that knight? Why was that knight there? That seems awful. Just plain fucking awful. Jesus, I don't know. I'm really not sure about this situation. Like, bishop takes knight, king moves, pawn takes knight, rook takes pawn. That doesn't seem great. Doesn't seem good at all. Crap baskets, dude. This is hard. This is hard. I don't see. And I'm in a pin because of that bishop. It is just all sorts of bad over here. Just pretty fucking terrible. And it's a one move puzzle too, so I don't even get to see, unless we go to the analysis board, for what's going to happen after all of this. I can't seem to calculate how there is a beneficial exchange that can happen for white in this situation. Oh jeez. Looks like I'm losing material either way. And he's like already ahead on material as well. Oh my gosh. This is brutal. Good lord. Queen e4 is not an option because after that there is pawn takes d5 or bishop takes d5, which is oof. Oofta, I say. Oofta. I wonder if there's something very obvious that I'm not focusing on. Something where I can fly my king away, but also put some sting onto his side. But boy, oh boy, just with so many avenues of attack, I just don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it. Yeah. Oh, I'm just gonna take that knight, and that's gonna be wrong, but I guess I'd like to see what the right answer is. The right answer is take that. Okay, and then I guess they'll play that out for us. I'm not sure why that happens. Let's bum bum bum. Let's get the thing out and see why this isn't a thing that can happen. I guess the bishop can't just necessarily take there because there's this. What? Why won't you let me do it? Oh, it's not my turn. Well, yeah. Okay, I see. So in the end, that kingpin. It's actually more of a skewer, but God, what a terrible joke. Is the reason why, and also why we shouldn't take with the bishop. If this were the case, then yes, I would be in trouble. This is just terrible. However, if I take here, then this leads to issues. Okay. I see. I only thought about trying to trade well, evenly, with the bishop and the knight, while in fact, by taking with the rook there, I was promoting more potential attacks I could have done later. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Oh, I think I've used up almost all of my chess brain power for today. 16 out of 18, so I did get to 20 pins. Definitely didn't finish 20 forks or 20 pins and forks, but I definitely did like. I found it more beneficial than I thought I would, just focusing on one tactical motif for now. So next week, or next time I make a video, whenever God that is, I'm just gonna do the same thing, just focusing on more pins, and we're gonna go at it. We're gonna go at it hard, and maybe try to do like another 15 pins, and keep on continuing until I just start rocking these pin problems, which I don't know if I'll be able to or not. I don't know. We'll see, and then we'll make some decisions after that. But that won't be for another hundreds and hundreds of videos. So yeah, thanks for watching today, and I'll see you in the next one.